The Haunted Locker by Darren Lamb. It all started with the book The Teachings of Don Juan by Carlos Castaneda. It's one of those books I can read over and over again without getting bored with it. I read it probably once every 6 months or so. In the book, Don Juan gives his student Carlos a challenge of finding his best spot, or sitio, on Don Juan's porch. Carlos has to search the porch for the spot where he feels naturally happy and strong, the one place on the floor that is unique to Carlos and where he feels free to be at his very best. When you're 15, life can be confusing, and it's easy to feel out of place because you haven't settled into the person you wish to become yet. The concept of having a place where the pressures of discovering who you are could vanish for a little while always appealed to me. After my first reading of the book, my life has been spent searching for my magical spot. I suppose everyone is searching in some way or another, looking for that mythical place where they feel strong and accepted. Maybe that's what life is all about, if life has a meaning, that is. I've seen hundreds of different ways people search for their spot. My father searched for it at the bottom of a bottle, while my mother searched for it on the Home Shopping Network. The mistake I made was thinking that there could only be good spots. Don Juan never mentioned the dark places. That's probably because he never had Locker 42E. The Castaneda book wasn't something I would normally read, but my sister Marcia pushed it on me. Marcia devoured books in the same way I devoured Hot Pockets, and although she typically read fantasy books like Tolkien or C.S. Lewis, she would occasionally branch out and try something new. Books had a way of surprising you like that. You could pick something up from outside your genre and bam, suddenly there was a whole new level of adventure you hadn't previously known about. Sometimes the words on paper could catch you like that. Other times they left you flat. During one of the school book fairs, Marcia had won a coupon for a free book from a local bookstore because she could always read at an uber nerd level. This was a specialty bookstore though, so the choices of books to choose from had been somewhat limited. This particular place specialized in self-help and new age books, neither of which had been Marcia's favorite flavor of reading material. Marcia had picked up the Castaneda book thinking it was about the great lover Don Juan and not some Indian shaman talking about plants. The Castaneda series failed to light a fire for Marcia. One day I had been in her room trying to explain how comic books were better than word books because they were shorter and had cool pictures, but Marcia would never be able to appreciate the awesomeness that is Daredevil or Chew. She had offered the Castaneda book as a type of peace offering and a way to get me out of her room if she promised to read at least 2 issues of Sandman. I had started the teachings of Don Juan mostly out of boredom. It had been a Monday night, and with new comic book day still 2 days away, I had long since read through my weekly supply, and none of my back issues were leaping out at me. Rather than lamenting over how I had spent my money on action figures instead of on enough trade paperbacks to get me through the week, I decided to read the Castaneda book. After a few pages, I was surprised at how much I was actually enjoying the book. The mentor-apprentice relationship always intrigued me, perhaps because I've always been looking for a father figure myself. I didn't quite know exactly how I was supposed to be the man in my house when my dad left, but I knew someone had to step up. If I were just 1 year older, I could get a job and help my mother out a little bit, or at least pay for my own comic books. But Mom keeps telling me that I have my whole life to work for someone else, and that I might as well enjoy my youth while I can. It's not like my dad was a bad person or anything like that, but alcohol has a way of seeping into everything and then consuming it. It's like the black symbiote Spider-Man costume that eventually became Venom. It consumes its host, leaving nothing but echoes behind. I sometimes wonder if it was my father's failure to be happy that contributed to the drinking, or was it the other way around? Did the drinking prevent him from seeing those people who loved him? I can't honestly say, and my mother will never talk about it. Some psychiatrist will probably tell me someday that I made an unconscious choice to be a father figure to Marcia. It's silly because she's 2 years older than me, and when we walk the halls of the high school, we avoid each other like Superman and Kryptonite. But I still check in on her from the corner of my eye and listen to whatever scuttlebutt happens to be going around the school, making sure none of it is about my sister. It's not like Marcia needs protection or anything. She's one of the popular kids who has the school eating out of the palm of her hand. She's on the student body, she's a cheerleader, and she's a drummer in a fairly decent cover band, and her grades are such that she's going to go to whichever college she chooses. I, on the other hand, am more of a chameleon, blending into whatever situation I find myself in, becoming king of the wallflowers. I have good friends, but we're always the one hiding in the back of the computer lab, building motherboards, and discovering cheat codes in video games. 42E is in the basement of my high school where no lockers would logically be. My high school is the same place where that movie High School Musical was filmed, East High School in Salt Lake City, Utah. However, Don't let all the singing, dancing, or Zac Efron's abs fool you. The place is evil, and I believe Locker 42 is the reason why. On registration day, I was confused when I got my locker assignment because the school had a basic numbering system for the lockers. The A lockers were located on the first floor, the B lockers on the second, the C lockers were on the third floor, and the D lockers were in the field house. I asked my friends if they knew where the E lockers were located, but none of them knew. I returned to the office and asked Mrs. Williams, the school secretary, who told me the E-lockers were located in the basement, just off the main staircase by the school's front doors. I had a Walmart bag filled with notebooks, pens, and other various school supplies I would need for the upcoming year. I had even been lucky enough to talk my mom into buying me a few University of Utah stickers from my locker, even though I knew deep down she was hoping I would choose to go to Brigham Young University. The U of U's campus is only about a mile from East High, and if I sometimes had a big homework project, I would usually sneak into their library and use their computers. Sometimes a group of us would go to the student union building and bowl a few games for a cheap group date. The U had been good to me, and I wasn't even a student there, so I felt it was okay to pay them a little homage on my locker. As I walked down the main stairs to the basement, I tried to remember if I had ever been in this part of the school, but if I had, I couldn't remember it. From an architectural standpoint, the hallway didn't make any sense. There were no classrooms down here, but there was one maintenance office that looked only to be slightly bigger than a closet, where the janitors probably stored their mop buckets and garbage bags. But other than that, there was nothing. The part of me filled with raging hormones and teenage angst pointed out that the hallway was a perfect metaphor for my life, a hallway that led nowhere. As the end of the hallway got closer and closer, one of the overhead lights began to flicker and then eventually dim to about half power. This was enough for me to start having the heebie-jeebies. It was easy to imagine some scary music beginning to play in the soundtrack of my life, and I watched as my shadow gradually faded into the darkness with every step I took. I clutched the Walmart bag and wondered if I truly needed to store my stuff in the locker today. Of course I was just freaking myself out, and they would more than likely have the fluorescent light bulb switched before the first day of school, but I hoped there'd be enough light for me to read the combination numbers on my locker. When I first saw the E-lockers, I was excited because rather than the standard half lockers which the school had, these basement lockers were full size. I was in the school band and my clarinet case would never fit in the half lockers the school had, so I had to carry it around with me all day. I thought maybe this year people could see me as something other than the band geek. I could even leave my clarinet here overnight, which would mean I wouldn't have to lug it up the steep streets of the city avenues on my way to and from school. 42E was the last locker in the hallway, and as I got to it, I noticed a small amount of moisture seeping out from one of the bottom corners, like condensation on a glass. I bent down to touch it, and my fingers came away wet. I thought there must be some type of plumbing running through the walls near the base of my locker, which meant I wouldn't be able to store anything on the floor of my locker without it getting wet. Viktor Frankl once said, "Between stimulus and response, there is a space. In that space is our power to choose our response, and in our response lies our growth and freedom." My mom was in the habit of quoting this to me often because I can be quite impulsive, and a lot of times I do things without thinking them all the way through. Looking back, if there was one moment in my life I wish I could change, it would be this moment, walking to 42E and forever sealing our fate. I would give anything in the world to change my response to the stimulus the locker was giving me and go back to the office to tell Mrs. Williams about the moisture and see if I could get a new locker assignment to me. But I didn't, and this has made all the difference. There was barely enough light to see the combination dial, but I read the numbers off the little locker assignment card the office had given me, and after 2 tries, I opened the locker. There was no moisture on the bottom of the locker, so maybe whatever was leaking or causing condensation wasn't affecting the inside of the locker, but I made a mental note to keep an eye on it all the same. I stored my supplies inside the locker, put the U of U sticker on the inside of the door, and went home. It was about a month into school when the strange things started to happen. My school has a strict policy against cell phones. The school isn't naive enough to think the students will keep their phones at home, but they come down pretty hard on you if they find you using them in the classroom. They say it's because having a cell phone with internet access makes cheating far too easy and provides students with the temptation to do so, but I think it's more about the disrespect it shows towards our teachers when students are updating their TikTok feed during a lecture. I usually keep my cell phone in my backpack, but one day I forgot to put it in silent mode and received a phone call from a telemarketing company during my homeroom class. I thought for sure Mr. Harrison, my algebra teacher who was a Vietnam vet and always looks like he's about a second away from having some Charlie's in the Bush flashback, was going to confiscate my phone. But instead, he recommended that I keep my phone in my locker, all the while giving me the 1,000-yard stare. The next day when I arrived to school, I put my cell phone on the top shelf of my locker as I hung up my coat and went about my day. When school was over for the day, I grabbed my phone and checked to see if there was anything I had missed. The battery was dead. I knew I had a full charge in the morning because I always check to see what's trending on Twitter while I'm eating my frozen waffles or Pop-Tarts. The next morning, I made sure it had a full charge and again set it on the top shelf of my locker. But this time at the end of the day, it still had an 86% charge. It went on like that for a while. Most days it would be fine and have a decent charge at the end of the day, but every now and again it would be totally dead. Sometimes I would turn my phone off completely before leaving it in the locker and heading into my first class. More than once when I did this, the phone either had a dead battery when I tried to turn it on again, or it had somehow turned itself on at some point during the day. I had my friends in the computer lab, the hack attack we called ourselves, even though the toughest thing any of us had ever hacked was cheat codes for video games, look at the phone one afternoon while we were doing some coding in the computer lab. But none of them could see anything wrong with it. The strange condensation happened randomly as well. It didn't seem to matter whether it was hot or cold outside. It was never inside the locker itself, but when it started showing up on the upper corners of the locker, I ruled out that there must be some pipe hidden in the wall behind the locker. Once I showed up for school and the entire door to my locker looked like the outside of a soda can on a hot summer's day. I touched the door and the metal was cold and clammy, but when I opened the locker, there was no moisture inside. I went to the office and had Mrs. Williams call somebody from building maintenance to come look at it, but when we got back to my locker, the perspiration on the door was gone, and the door no longer felt cold. This had been maybe 5 minutes from when I first noticed the condensation and went to the office. I asked Mrs. Williams if there was any possibility of getting a new locker assigned to me, but she told me it was too late in the year and there simply weren't any available. This was sometime in November, so school had been going on for about 3 months at this point. I never saw the condensation appear on any other lockers in the E-Hall. There was a pep rally for the football game, and Marcia naturally had to be there as part of her cheerleader duties. As she ran out onto the floor, there was something off about her smile. Of course, being a cheerleader, she had to keep a false smile on her face all of the time, but today it was different. I doubt anybody else could notice, but I lived with her, and I had known her all my life. Since neither I nor my friends had any interest in football, most of the time the Hack Attack and I would skip the pep rallies and either go to someone's house to play video games or hang out at the 7-Eleven across the street from the school, trying to kill ourselves slowly through an overabundance of Cheetos and Slurpees. But this was one of the first rallies of the year, and I always tried to make a few just so I could support Marcia. As we were sitting in the bleachers, one of the football players, a guy named Shane who just happens to have the locker next to mine, came over and tapped me on the shoulder. Unlike most of the other football players, Shane was a nice guy, and he never seemed to restrict himself to social structures. He was nice to everybody. We weren't exactly friends, but what I knew about him I liked. I assumed that he was going to ask me something about Marcia. "Hey dude, I don't mean to be a jerk, but do you think you could clean out your locker sometime soon? Whatever you have in there reeks to high heaven," he said. I had no idea what he was talking about because the only things I ever kept in my locker were my books, my jacket, and my clarinet, none of which could smell. I never put food in there because I either ate school lunch or went over to the 7-Eleven. However, I told him I definitely would, and he held out his hand for me to fist bump. After the pep rally, I went to the basement to see what Shane was talking about, and as soon as I entered the hallway, the smell hit me like I was walking into a wall. It smelled like wet dog, cinnamon, and moldy fruit. The smell got stronger as I walked towards the end of the hall, and when I got to my locker, it was almost painful to breathe. I opened my locker, and whatever the smell was intensified tenfold. I took my books, my jacket, and my clarinet out of my locker and stared into the cold metal box labeled 42E. It looked like an empty locker. The only thing that was different was my University of Utah sticker. The big white U now was a dull yellow color, like a faded mustard stain on an old shirt, and some of the corners had begun to peel off. I left the locker open, hoping to somehow air it out, and went home. When I came back the next morning, the smell was gone, and the U sticker was back to white, but now it was crooked, and not at some weird 45-degree angle that was obviously deliberate. It was just slightly tipped. I was never able to get the smell out of my books or jackets, though. Every time I would go into one of my classes and open a book, I would be surrounded by that awful stench. Sometimes the student would complain, but most of the time, it was as if I was the only one who could smell it. The clarinet was a different story, though. The smell of that thing got so bad my band teacher asked me not to play it anymore and lent me one of the school instruments, which was good because every time I tried to play that thing, it was all I could do to suppress my gag reflex. After, my mom tried to sell it on everything from eBay to Craigslist, but whenever she sold it, the buyer would return it within a week demanding their money back. It eventually ended up in the city dump. Some days my locker combination wouldn't open no matter how many times I tried it. Other days the camera on my phone would take random pictures from the inside of my locker, time-stamped at a time when I was in class. One night I was at the student library at the U working on a paper, and I had finished it earlier than I expected. If I could slide the paper under my sociology teacher's door, then I would get to sleep in for an extra hour and a half the next morning, because all we were doing in class that next day was turning in our papers and watching the last part of a documentary that I had already finished streaming on Netflix. There's something odd about being in the school at night. Everything is so quiet, and you notice how wide the halls are when they're not full of students. I pushed the paper underneath my teacher's door and started to think about the Spider-Man game mission that I was about halfway through, when I decided I had better check on whatever mischief 42E was up to before heading home. The school had some sort of energy-saving half-light program running during the off hours, so the basement hallway, where there were no windows, was much darker than it was during the day. When I opened 42E, after putting in the exact same set of numbers into the combination locks 4 separate times, the shadows fell in such a way that it was impossible to see the back of the locker. It looked like an abyss, and a large part of me wanted to jump into it. Although several odd things had happened with my locker, I had never been afraid of it until that night. I looked upon the events as mere inconveniences or quirkinesses as opposed to something I should worry about. But that night, staring into the blackness contained in that 1.5 by 4 foot space, my sense of self-preservation kicked in, and all my monitors were set to flight instead of fight. Somehow I knew if I were to reach out and close the door, something cold and wet from the inside would grab my wrist, and no one would ever know what had happened to me. I wanted to run, but there are things in this universe that you simply cannot run, and I knew that whatever was inside the locker would catch me and devour me before I got halfway down the hall. Humans are one of the few stupid animals that when we feel our life is on the line, we will try to rationalize our feelings instead of just getting somewhere safe. The logical part of my brain knew I was feeling this because it was night and I was seeing the locker in an unfamiliar way, but all the logic in the world doesn't make you feel any better about the thing that lives under your bed or the monster in your closet. I had almost willed my arm to close the locker door when something did come out of the locker. It was a guinea pig. I'd been staring into the locker for a good 5 minutes before it came out. There was no way it had been in there the whole time. It walked to the edge of the locker, then climbed down to the floor. The guinea pig didn't run away, it just wobbled for a few steps like it was dazed. It found its way over to my Chuck Taylors, sniffed them once, and then it died. It just fell over and was gone. Painted on the side of its body was a bright blue number 3. Amidst the horror I was experiencing, I felt a wave of compassion for the guinea pig. I have a soft spot for animals, and as crazy as this might sound, this was the first time in my life I had ever seen something die in real life. I bent down and picked up the animal, which was still warm, and I couldn't help but notice how soft its fur was in the places that weren't marred by the blue paint. Wherever it had come from, and I would definitely be freaking out about this later, I didn't want to leave it here in the basement hall. I went over to the maintenance office and was lucky enough to find it opened. I found a trash bag and gently put number 3 inside of it. I would take it home, find a box, and bury it in the backyard. I don't know why I felt so attached to the damn thing. Perhaps it's because we shared 42E in some way. As I was tying the knot in the garbage bag, a horrifying thought came to me. What if something else came out of the locker? What if something came looking for number 3? What would that something be? There was a flashlight inside of the maintenance closet sitting on a cart amongst the giant rolls of toilet paper and spray bottles filled with various cleaners. I took the flashlight and peeked around the maintenance office door towards 42E. Sure, I would see something standing in the hallway waiting for me, but the hall was empty except for the crushing silence. I slowly walked back to the locker and stared inside. The blackness inside the locker looked almost tangible, like black velvet or a Labrador's fur. It was more than just shadow. It was truly an absence of light in every sense of the word. I shined the flashlight into the locker, but nothing changed. The beam of light went into the locker and then was absorbed by whatever was there. I couldn't see the back wall of my locker, only that oil-slick blackness. That was enough for me. I put the flashlight back where I found it and decided to go home. But the locker kept pulling me towards it. I was like a somnambulist, mindlessly drawn to the sound of possible meat. I touched the shadow thing inside my locker, gently at first, but then I plunged my hand inside, trying to feel the back wall of my locker. My hand and arm kept going. Soon my entire arm was inside 42E, and I was twisting my shoulders and head, trying to reach even further inside. My hand never touched the back wall. The abyss inside my locker was warm and moist, like the inside of a steam room. I could feel a slight breeze on the palm of my hand, like my arm had reached through the darkness and was now on the other side of something. It was a pleasurable sensation, but I wish I could fit my head inside my locker so I could see what was on the other side. I tried to push my hand further inside, but the door frame of the locker was already digging into my non-existent chest and back muscles. Then something touched my hand. I yanked my arm out of the locker and ran down the hallway screaming. I left the locker door open and number 3 on the hallway floor. Once I was outside the school and had put some distance between myself and 42E, I slowed down and caught my breath. I wondered if I had just found my spot. Sadly, in the teachings of Don Juan, Carlos Castaneda never mentioned what a person was supposed to do when they found their spot. He just wrote about the importance of searching for it and not giving up until your spot was found. I thought perhaps he might mention what to do next in one of his other books, so I decided to see if Marcia had any more or to ask her which ones I should order off of Amazon. I went into Marcia's room, and I found her crying. "What's wrong?" I asked, and tried not to hate myself for the momentary delay inquiring into my sister's well-being would bring. She'd been sitting on her bed, looking at her laptop, and when I came into the room, she slammed the laptop shut, but not before I could see the familiar borders of Snapchat. "Oh, it's nothing," Marcia said, wiping the tears from her eyes. "It's just stupid girl stuff." This hadn't been the first time I caught Marcia crying lately. At first I assumed she was having trouble because whatever guy she was oogling that week hadn't noticed her efforts or reciprocated, or whatever else teenage girls worry about. But now being confronted with it, I wasn't so sure. Marcia could get any guy she wanted, and deep down she knew it. It wasn't like her to get all bent out of shape like this. I forgot about asking about the Castaneda book and sat down with my sister. Even though we seldom spoke at school, or even acknowledged each other's existence for that matter, when we were at home, we were close. "You can tell me what's going on. I promise I will keep it between us," I said, but Marcia wouldn't budge. "That's sweet of you, goofball, and I appreciate it, but you really can't help with this one. It will blow over. I don't even know why I'm crying about it. I'm sure I'll be laughing about it in no time at all." She gave me a kiss on the top of the head, and then not so subtly shoved me out of her room. Before, I probably would have just listened to my sister, but that was before I found 42E and my spot. Now I could feel the level of pain my sister was going through, and it was far worse than she was letting on. When she kissed my head, I felt the pure anguish she was experiencing, and there was something else there that frightened me. There was darkness, and there was cold, and there was the ending that dropped off into an oblivion. Seeing into her mind like that had been like looking into my empty locker. I thought my sister might actually be contemplating suicide. I immediately went to my room and booted up my computer. Hacking into my sister's accounts was ridiculously easy because she thought she was being cute when she made all of her passwords incorrect. That way, if I ever forget my password, the computer will tell me my password is incorrect, she had told me. She used that password for everything. At some point, I was going to have to sit her down and discuss online security with her, but for the moment, I was glad I had the access. Just like when I went to my lockers tonight, I wasn't sure exactly what I would find, but I knew there would be something. I first opened her email account because I thought she might actually still be logged into Snapchat, and that's when I saw it. There were hundreds of emails from a half-dozen girls at our school, calling Marcia a slut, a whore, a bitch, and every other imaginable insult. There were emails saying that the world would be a better place without her in it, explaining in great detail how everyone at the school hated her, and how she should probably just kill herself. My sister was being bullied. The thought of this seemed stranger to me than watching my hand sink into a wall of darkness. My sister was one of the popular kids. She was in every conceivable club. She played drums in a rock band, for Christ's sake. She was way cooler than I would ever be. Marcia wasn't the type of person who got bullied. It was ludicrous. If my parents were to ask which one of their children would be more likely to be bullied, 1,000% of the time they would say me. The sheer magnitude of the barrage was staggering, and from what I could tell, it had been going on for months. As I read through the tsunami of hatred that scrolled past my computer screen, I felt my stomach drop and my heart became cold. The compulsion to go back to school and sit in my spot was almost overpowering, but there was something voyeuristic about reading through the emails. It was like finding a hidden level in a video game, or an Easter egg in a movie that opened up a slew of new possibilities. Discovering this heartbreaking aspect of my sister's life made me disgusted and filled me with surprising rage. How had this been going on for such a long time without my noticing it? I understand we have this unspoken rule about leaving each other alone at school, but had I really been so self-absorbed not to even notice Marcia's suffering? Things that had once seemed so normal suddenly were no longer so. Marcia had been losing weight, a lot of weight. When my parents mentioned it one night at the dinner table, Marcia had just shrugged it off and claimed that she needed to stay skinny if she was going to keep her spot on the cheerleading squad. I doubted that this was true, because Heather Springfield was on the cheerleading squad, and Heather was in a wheelchair. I doubted that Mormonville, make sure you never have sex with anyone East High School, had such a stringent body requirements for its cheer squad, so I had blown it off as a girl thing. In one of the emails, there was a link to a YouTube video. I hesitated for a moment and then clicked the link. The video was of Kim Dell, captain of the cheerleading squad, saying how after a wrestling match last year, Marcia had let 4 of the high school wrestlers gangbang her and had gotten pregnant. Kim went on to explain how Marcia had had an abortion and had absolutely no idea who the father was. I knew this was complete bullshit and was positive that anybody who even remotely knew Marcia would think so as well, but the video had over 3,000 views. Not viral by a long shot, but that number must be destroying Marcia. I clicked on Kim's user profile, Cheer for You 1369, trying and failing not to scoff at the name. Kim Davis had all the originality of a grumpy cat meme. The truly sad part was that 1,369 other people thought the name was clever enough to use. Of the 47 videos Kim had posted, over 30 of them were about Marcia. Over the next 2 hours, I watched the systematic and relentless persecution of my sister by someone who I had believed to be her friend. Wasn't there some code where cheerleaders were all friends with each other? Or was that just some kind of stereotypical fantasy people had created in their minds over the years? Still, it seemed strange to me, like Batman making fun of Aquaman or something. One of the videos showed Marcia in a store buying a prom dress. Kim and some of the other girls on the cheerleading squad had followed Marcia into the store shouting taunts, saying how they didn't make prom dresses for pregnant whores, and asking Marcia if the basketball team got a discount for buying her services in bulk. I vaguely remember how Preston Evans had asked Marcia to the prom that year, but Marcia had canceled at somewhat the last minute, surprising everyone in the family. Preston was on the student body with Marcia, and from what I could tell, he seemed like an alright guy. He played bass in a rival band, but on more than one occasion, he and Marcia had sat out in the garage jamming together. It was probably around that time that Marcia's hair started falling out. She had told my parents that it had just been a reaction to a pimple medication Marcia had started taking, but now I had no doubt that Marcia was literally pulling out her hair. I had noticed more than once and dismissed all the time she sat on the couch next to me, twirling her fingers around her hair while we watched The Office or Parks and Recreations. Watching the videos made me sick. Why hadn't Marcia talked to me about this? How had this been going on so long without my being aware? Was I really so self-absorbed? I started thinking about how little I knew about my sister. When we were home, we hung out, but a lot of that time was spent either playing video games or watching movies. I couldn't remember the last time we had a meaningful conversation. Even when my family sat around the dinner table asking each other about our days, there was a lot of talking, but very little being said. Maybe I should talk to my mom or go to the principal. I doubted if they knew about the bullying either. I didn't know what to do, and the more I thought about it, the more helpless I felt. I knew it would be a sleepless night, and the thought of lying in bed staring at the ceiling seemed too bleak to think about. I put on my jacket and told myself I was just going for a walk to get some fresh air and clear my head, but I knew this was a lie I was telling myself. I took the shortest path possible to the high school. As I walked to the basement, I wondered if the school had some type of security guard patrolling the halls, but I didn't think so. East High School sat in the center of the most boring city in the country. I could feel something tugging at my chest, like in that movie Donnie Darko, where the luminous blob came out of Jake Gyllenhaal's chest. But there was no blob, and whatever it was felt more like icy fish hooks embedded into my heart than whatever existential crap that blob in the movie was supposed to represent. Yet it wasn't unpleasant. As I reached the bottom of the stairs, I thought I could see the faintest shimmer coming from my locker, whose door was now shut. It looked like the heat waves you could sometimes see rising off the asphalt on hot summer days. But the hall was quite dark, so I thought it must be just my eyes adjusting to the light. The garbage bag with number 3 was still there. I picked it up and sat down with my back against the locker, placing the guinea pig in my lap. It didn't feel right calling it number 3. It was a living creature, and it deserved a name, so I decided to call him Jerry. "I'm sorry, Jerry," I said. "I didn't mean to leave you behind like that." I didn't dare open my locker, and I was praying that the thin sheet metal door and the combination lock would be enough to keep whatever strange things happening inside my locker on the inside. But I also wanted to be near it. Like how watching tigers through the inch of plexiglass at the zoo can be relaxing, but you would never want to be on the other side of that glass. I didn't know what to do to help Marcia, and I didn't know what was happening with my locker, so in some broken logical way, it made sense for me to go to 42E and find a solution for Marcia's situation. I wrapped my coat around me like a blanket, trying to ignore how bad it still smelled. The locker was warm in the cool hallway. Its gentle heat radiated into my back, and as I gently stroked Jerry's body through the plastic bag, soon I fell asleep. A few days later, Jerry was buried in an old Chuck Taylor's box in the corner of our backyard. As my best friend John and I were playing Halo and consuming a frightening amount of pizza rolls and Mountain Dew, I debated on telling him about the craziness of my life. He of course knew about the smells my locker produced, because it still lingered in my jacket no matter how many times I washed it, but that was all he knew. We hit the end of a mission, and I went back into the kitchen to reload on food. "Hey John, do you believe in ghosts or haunted houses or things like that?" I asked. John was a lot smarter than I was about a lot of things. His grades in science were always better than mine, and he liked to read philosophy books in his free time. He would try to explain to me the differences between Schopenhauer and Hegel, but I could never keep up with it. He was logical in a Spock sort of way, almost to the point of being obnoxious about it, so I was afraid he wouldn't take my question seriously, but he surprised me with a willingness to talk about it. "I do, but not in the way most people think," he said. "In what way do you think about it?" Most people, when they talk about things being haunted, they mean by ghosts or other paranormal things like that. And while there's evidence to support this, I just don't think that's what's actually happening. "There's evidence?" I asked. "Well, perhaps not hard evidence, but theoretical evidence. Like how in the conversion of energy theory, Julius Robert Mayer stated that energy can neither be created nor destroyed. Rather, it transforms from one form to another. A lot of people use this to support the existence of an afterlife. Since we're made up of energy and energy cannot be destroyed, when we die, the energy has to go somewhere, and therefore there's an afterlife." "That seems like a stretch," I said. "It's a huge stretch. It's like going from A to B to Q. Plus, it completely disregards the second part, which states that energy transforms from one form to another. But when talking about things being haunted, people tend to think the things haunting whatever objects are supposedly haunted must be from something that has already died or can't move on or something like that." "But you have a better explanation?" I asked. "Have you ever heard of ley lines?" "No," I said. Ley lines are a part of string theory. You know the many worlds theory, right? The multiverse? According to this theory, there are an infinite number of universes existing at the same point in space, but they vibrate at different frequencies from one another, and because of this difference in vibration, they can't interact with one another. Are you with me so far? "I'm following you," I say, as I place a new tray of pizza rolls into the oven. "So major ley lines are lines that go around the world where the frequency of our universe is vibrating at its most intense frequency. There are different types of lines which are categorized by how strong they generate our universe's frequency. However, and this is where things being haunted comes into play, if there are these lines where our frequency is strong, it only makes sense that there are places where the frequency is very weak, or perhaps not even being generated at all. Now, what if in one of these billions of alternate universes, one of their intensely strong ley lines happens to cross over at one of the places in our universe where our frequency is weak? Are you still with me?" "I think so," I said. "If you accept string theory and ley lines, and then add them to the multi-universe theories, and we add upon them billions upon billions of various possibilities that these ley lines cross over one another, it's almost impossible to envision a situation where this would not happen. I think if we're ever going to cross over into another dimension, it's going to be at one of these weak spots." "That's where the haunted things would be?" I said. "Yes, what we think of as haunted could simply be a stronger frequency from another universe pushing its way into our own." "So the ghost we see or strange sounds we hear are just aspects from another dimension forcing its way into our world?" I asked, thinking about Jerry the guinea pig. "Exactly," John said, pulling 4 Mountain Dews out of the fridge, 2 for each of us. The concept John was describing wasn't completely new to me. This is basically all the Marvel Cinematic Universe had been feeding us lately. I don't know how much I believed the theory, and honestly, I didn't care. What mattered was that my best friend might just be open to the possibility I was about to share with him. "John, I think my locker might be haunted." He laughed, thinking I was making a joke, but then when he saw the look on my face, he stopped immediately. "Wait, are you serious?" he asked. "I'm dead serious," I said. "Tell me everything." So I told him. I didn't tell him about Jerry because I knew I would never be able to convey the horror I felt as that dying thing was inching its way towards my shoe, or the fear that something else would come out after it. But I did tell him about the darkness, and about pushing my hand through to whatever was on the other side. When I told John about something there touching me, he said he had to see this for himself. We abandoned our Halo mission and headed for the school. Once again, I found myself in the ominous-looking hallway with its energy-saving half-light. This was the only time I ever approached my locker where I was hoping to see something strange, something to support my story and make my friend believe me. But as we got to 42E, it looked just like the rest of the lockers in the basement hallway. It looked like an ordinary locker. I took the small locker assignment card the office had given me on registration day out of my wallet, and I handed it to John. "You open it," I said. He shrugged and then entered the number printed on the card onto the combination lock. The locker opened on his first try. Every time I had tried to open my locker, every time, it had taken me at least 2 tries to open it. John opened the locker, and even in the half-lit hallway, the dull gray paint of the back wall could easily be seen, even before John shined his flashlight inside. I nudged John out of the way and pressed my hand against the back of the locker. The metal was cool to the touch, then slowly warmed from the heat of my palm, just like any other sheet metal on the planet would. John didn't say anything, but I could tell he was disappointed. I pulled my hand out and had the feeling that 42E was mocking me somehow. "Maybe you need to do it," John said, closing the locker. I put the combination into the lock, and for the first time ever, it opened for me on the first try. The locker looked the same, completely normal. Except it wasn't normal. Nothing about this was normal. "And you just put your hand through the back wall?" John asked, placing his hand inside a 42E, and the instant before the locker door slammed on his arm, I knew. The locker had been baiting us, waiting for us to lower our guard so it could feed. I heard 2 distinct cracks as the radius and all the bones in his forearm snapped. A steady stream of blood began to slide down the adjacent locker and began to pool on the floor as John screamed. I tried to get my fingers around the door to pry it open, but the door had slammed with so much force there was no space to stick my fingers. Crushed within the gap of maybe 1/4 of an inch was John's arm. I heard something clunk inside the locker and prayed it was John's flashlight falling to the floor and not his arm. John yanked violently against the door. He screamed the entire time. I had never heard my friend or anyone else scream like that. Huge droplets of sweat formed on his face, and I could remember Mr. Melville, our health teacher, describing this as one of the symptoms of shock, but I couldn't remember any of the steps on how to treat it. I wouldn't have thought anything could possibly be worse than my friend's wails, but I was wrong. It was so much worse when he stopped screaming and his face turned white as the blood ran out of it. "Oh God, it's touching me," John said. I was still trying to pry the door open and having no luck with it. "Oh God, it's touching me. What's touching me? What is touching me?" He yanked against the door even harder, and at one point his foot slipped in a pile of blood that was now seeping on the floor. "Get it off me, Jeff. Get it off, please." Then just like that, 42E let him go. The force of both of us pulling against the locker made us go flying back once it released him. John clutched his broken arm, and I tried not to get sick from the way his hand would flop around and how the arm would bend in all kinds of ways it wasn't supposed to. "Call my mom," John said. I pulled out my cell phone and accidentally called John's cell phone by mistake before dialing his home phone. "Sorry," I said while waiting for an answer. John's face was still white. I had heard the saying as white as a ghost, but hadn't really thought much about it until I saw John in the dim light of that basement. I remembered Mr. Melville saying something about getting the patient to lay down, so I gently pulled John to the floor and just held him as the phone rang. With his head against the floor and mine resting on his, our perception of the world was sideways. I looked at my open locker, and I swear it was smiling at me. "Hello?" a voice said, and I could easily recognize the voice of John's mom. "Mrs. Wilson, this is Jeff. There's been an accident at the school, and John has broken his arm. He's okay, but we need to get him to the hospital. Can you come pick us up at the school?" "Wait, what? Is John okay?" "Please, Miss Wilson, just come get us," I pleaded into the phone. "Okay, I'm on my way. Where should I meet you?" "We will be waiting by the front doors." "Thank you," I said, and hung up. I looked at John's arm and trying to figure out a way to stop the bleeding. The bottom of his forearm, just below the break, looked like it had burst open from the inside. "What was it, Jeff? What touched me?" he asked. I took off my gym sock and wrapped it around his arm. Then I took off the other sock and wrapped it again. He had lost a lot of blood, but the sock seemed to be slowing it down a little bit, and that's when I saw it. On John's palm, just like Jerry the guinea pig, was a blue number in the same handwriting. It was the number 8. John sat on a gurney in the emergency room while we all waited for the doctor to come back after viewing the x-rays. The color still hadn't fully returned to his face, but the doctors had given him a good dose of morphine, even though John's mom had voiced concerns over its addictive properties. In the end, John's crying and obvious pain had won out, and she let the doctors administer some through his IV. As we sat there, we tried to come up with something to tell John's mom, but the best either of us could do was to say that John had taken a bad fall on the stairs. I'm sure Mrs. Wilson knew we were lying, but thankfully she didn't push it. She asked if we were being bullied at school, which immediately made me think of Marcia. I liked Mrs. Wilson. She never seemed to mind when John and I wanted to hang out together, and if I happened to be at John's place come dinner time, she always set a place for me without asking. I wanted to tell her yes, just to see what she would do about it. Maybe I could be the guinea pig for Marcia. Maybe I could tell Mrs. Wilson that we were being bullied, and then see what, if anything, the school did about it. In the end, I told her no, though. I already felt bad enough about lying to her about John's arm, and I didn't see how adding more lies on top of the mix would make things any better. The doctor came in and told us John's forearm had 2 of the cleanest breaks he had ever seen. They put 29 stitches into John's arm where it had burst open, and then wrapped his arm in a bright red cast. When the cast was on and John complained that he would have a hard time typing while wearing it, I knew my friend was going to be okay. Plus, the cast extended partway over his hand, so it almost obscured that weird blue number 8. There was some paperwork to sign, so Mrs. Wilson stepped out of our curtained-off partition of the emergency room, leaving John and I alone. I wondered how lucid he would be on the morphine, but once we were alone, he started grilling me about the locker. "What the hell happened back there?" he asked. "John, I'm so sorry. I never meant for you to get hurt." "Dude, your locker tried to eat me. That is so not cool." "I'm so sorry. I never would have told you about it," I said. "Are you kidding me? We have to figure this out." I figured if I focused on Marcia's problems, I could forget all about the anxiety my locker was causing me. Every time I reached my hand inside the thing, I was worried either the door would slam on it or whatever had touched John and I would grab my hand and drag me to the other side. So rather than think about the locker, I sat in the bleachers watching the cheerleaders practice. It was so surreal watching them together because everything looked so normal. Since Kim was the head of the cheerleading squad, she was always the one on the top of the pyramids or at the center of every formation. Kim led all the cheers and had the worst fake smile I had ever seen, although I could be easily jaded towards her because I had seen the true ugliness that was inside of her. Her YouTube videos never stopped, and sometimes there were 2 or 3 new ones every day. There were a couple of other girls at the school she was bullying as well, but most of the videos focused on Marcia. I read through the comments sections of these videos trying to find out who else was involved, but YouTube is a place of anonymity, which emboldened the trolls to say the most vile and disgusting things about my sister. Various men were claiming to have had every type of sexual exploits possible with Marcia. There was one particular video where Kim and a bunch of other girls had Marcia trapped naked in the locker room and were threatening to super glue her legs shut. I'm a peaceful kid and I would never bring a gun to school to shoot up the place, but after watching hours of this systematic abuse, I could understand how it happens. Right next to the stairway that leads to the basement hall is the computer lab where my friends and I like to hang out. That meant the hallway just outside the doorway of the computer lab was directly above 42E. This is where the football players and basketball players like to hang out. Maybe they liked hanging out there so they could tease the computer geeks as they made their way into the computer lab, but I didn't think that was it. They had simply found their spot and it felt good to them and they had claimed it. It was the Don Juan spot for jocks. There had to be something about this place attracting them because Letterman jackets had been crowding this hallway since long before I started going to school here. Most of the other athletes don't pick on me too much though. Maybe it's because they have aspirations of hooking up with my sister, but it's more likely that I don't even register on their social radar. Besides, a lot of people at the school weren't even aware that Marcia and I are related. I love my sister, and I'm sure somewhere deep down she loves me too. It was just that we live in separate universes while at school. One day I hadn't been paying attention to where I was going as I was walking towards my locker, and I ran straight into Shane, the jock who had the locker right next to me who complained about the smell. The guy easily had 50 pounds on me, so it was like a fly hitting a windshield. I bounced off of him and fell down, and as Shane turned to see what had bumped into him, he tripped over my sprawled out body and fell onto my leg, accidentally breaking one of the bones in my shin. We all heard it snap when he fell on it. Shane felt horrible about the whole thing. I wasn't mad though. What else should I expect when a 190-pound linebacker steps on my scrawny chicken legs? Holy shit, if the coach thinks I deliberately broke your ankle, he will bench me for sure, Shane had said. It was an accident, and if anything, it was my fault, I said. Hell yeah, it was your fault. You should watch where you're going, one of Shane's football friends, a guy named Trevor, said. Dude, what happened? It was John, who had been waiting for me inside the computer lab and came down to the basement to see what was taking me so long. I think I broke my ankle, I said. You did not break your ankle. Just walk it off, Shane said. That is totally broken, John said, still sporting his bright red cast. Look at how his foot is bent. I looked down at my foot and saw my leg had formed a new joint right above the top of my Chuck Taylors. I scooted against the wall, and my left leg looked like the backwards L shape of a Tetris piece. John bent down and tried to straighten my leg, but stopped when he felt a sharp piece of my tibia sticking through my sock. John sent out a text to the rest of the hack attack and asked them to bring a bag of ice, while dozens of football players stood around doing nothing. I leaned my head against the cool steel of my locker and hoped no one else would step on me. Sitting there with my back against 42E, I felt a hot rage come over me. At first I thought I might be going into shock, but I knew this injury wasn't that severe. Strangely, I noticed that since I sat down against 42E, my foot didn't even hurt. Shane was going on and on about how sorry he was and how close he was to lettering and how this could screw up his chances. Well, then maybe you should watch where you're going, dipshit, I said. To say this was out of character for me would be the understatement of the century. I weighed less than 120 pounds, and my arms looked like pipe cleaners sticking out from my Magneto Was Right t-shirt. Shane looked shocked, and I think his guilt over accidentally hurting me was the only thing that kept him from pummeling my ass into a steaming heap of goo. Some of his friends weren't so forgiving, though. Trevor, who along with being the football team's center, was also Kim's boyfriend, kicked the thigh of my broken leg and told me I'd better watch my mouth. That was when I bit him. It wasn't hard enough to draw blood or anything, but I latched onto his leg and did my best to sink my teeth into his calf through his denim jeans. "Dude, what the hell?" John yelled as Trevor howled in pain and desperately tried to kick me off. Fortunately, at this point, the hack attack showed up with a bag of ice and the school nurse, which saved me from getting the end-all to beat-all of high school beatings. John asked if I thought I could walk on my foot if he helped me to the car, but the nurse told me to stay put. At the moment, I felt I could get up and qualify for the Boston Marathon. I had never felt better in my entire life, and I wasn't sure why. All I knew was that I didn't want to move from this spot. "I'm not sure if I can walk on it," I said, although this wasn't true, but if I could just sit there, maybe the school nurse would call for an ambulance or my mom to come get me, and I could stay here for a little while longer. I felt like I was sinking into the wall and the floor, and whenever John tried to talk to me, the sound was muted, like how the radio sounded when I was in the bathtub and I would put my head under the water to get the soap out of my hair. It was as if gravity had doubled, and all I wanted to do was lay down. I wondered why no one else had ever found this spot before, and why I was initially afraid of it. I knew this was the first time the school had put lockers down here, but surely students and faculty had been down here at some point. I'm not exactly sure how old East High was, but both my mother and father had gone here. My dad liked to tell people he married his high school sweetheart, even though my mom had once told me they had never actually dated while in high school. Then it hit me. No one else had discovered it because it was my spot. It wouldn't work for anybody else. It had just been waiting for me to be assigned. I touched the corner where the wall met the floor, and for the first time in my life, I knew I had the power to do anything I wanted. I knew I'd be able to take care of my mother and Marcia. The floor vibrated slightly at my touch, and I thought if I pushed against it hard enough, I might go through like Alice touching the looking glass. John and one of the other hack attack members picked me up in some type of fireman's carry where they basically made a chair out of their arms for me to sit in, and then carried me to the office. As they lifted me from the floor, the back of my shirt stuck to the locker momentarily, as if my clothes were wet. Perhaps the injury had caused me to sweat, but I felt fine, and my skin was cool to the touch. Another trip to the hospital and a few x-rays later confirmed that I had broken my tibia. It was a fairly clean break, and the same doctor who had fixed John's broken arm told me I would be in the cast for the next 8 weeks. The doctor teased John and I, saying that even though we were best friends, we didn't need to have matching casts. Later that night, I convinced my mom I needed to go back to the computer lab because I needed a thumb drive for an assignment I didn't get a chance to grab before my friends carried me to the office, and it would damage my grade if I didn't get it finished on time. My mom initially protested, saying that everyone in the school had known about my ankle, and since it happened right before my class and literally right outside the door of my lab, my computer teacher would surely understand and give me an extension. But moms are experts in reading their sons, and she knew I wouldn't let it go. Even Marcia had crossed the school's social gap and went to my teachers telling them what had happened. I happened to be one of the few students trusted with the key to the computer lab because sometimes I helped my teacher by running program assignments to ensure they were working properly, so my going to the school during off hours wasn't exactly a strange occurrence. I lied and told my mom John would take me to school and back, but instead I hobbled my way to the bus stop, my legs screaming all the while, and got on a bus. I knew I had to be alone for a while to wrap my head around what was happening. Besides, I wasn't going to let John get close to the locker again if I could help it. Once I was back in the hallway, I looked at 42E, hoping to see something different, but nothing looked strange or abnormal about it. It was just a locker, same as the other students' lockers. There were a few ghost turds, or as Marcia called them, dust bunnies, in the corners of the hall that would eventually be swept up by Mr. Wallace, the school's custodian, sometime soon. I sat down on the floor, my cast clunking on the tile floor, and leaned my back against the locker. What is it you want from me? Nothing happened. I wasn't sure what I was expecting to happen. Perhaps the rush of euphoria I had experienced earlier, but the disappointment of nothing happening was more saddening than I had been ready for. I sat there for a while, not exactly sure what I was even doing there. Maybe I had hurt my ankle more than I realized, or I was still loopy from the pain medication, although the stuff they gave me was nowhere near as strong as the stuff they gave John. Could I have gone into mild shock or something? This was stupid. Maybe if I hurried home, I could play some Xbox and make some nachos before going to bed. If I played my cards right, I could probably stay home tomorrow. But as I sat up, my shirt again felt like it was sticking to the locker. It wasn't a strong pull, not like Velcro or anything like that, more like the gentle glue on the back of a Post-it note, but it was definitely enough to notice. I scooted around so I was facing the locker and pressed my palm against the door. The dull gray steel door was still warm from my body temperature, but there was something else as well. The door had a certain tackiness to it. And what was more interesting was that I could swear if I pressed against the door, my hand would go through it the tiniest amount. It wasn't like when I reached through the back wall, but there was definitely some give to the door. It was so small, the rational part of my brain told me my palm wasn't going into the locker, but rather the skin of my hand was just flattening out against the additional pressure I applied. No, I was sure of it. My hand was sinking into the locker, even if it was only a fraction of an inch. I pressed harder, and there was a tingling against my palm, like mild electricity. It reminded me of those plasma balls they sometimes have in the black light room at Spencer's where John and I would go hang out at the mall. How the lightning inside the glass would be attracted to the areas where my flesh made contact with the glass. It didn't hurt, but you could feel the electricity if you tried. I pulled my hand away, and again there was the stickiness I associated with Post-it notes, or how sometimes dead skin would peel away from your body when you were peeling from a sunburn. I pressed my palm against the wall again, and this time the bolt of euphoria shot into me so hard my head snapped back with so much force I thought I had become a Pez dispenser. I let out a soft moan, but my hand never came off the locker. This was my spot, all right. I had never felt so alive. I was coming out of my bedroom for a Hot Pocket at the same time Marcia was coming out of the bathroom. Her fluffy sky blue robe hung loosely on her body, and I wondered just how much weight she had lost this year. Her cheekbones were prominent, and her chest seemed to be about as big as mine. She was dyeing her hair, and I could see patches of scalp showing through. Plus, there was a healthy amount of hair sticking to her towel. My God, she wasn't just pulling out her hair. It was literally falling out of her from this dress. My heart broke seeing my sister this way. She was trying to hold everything together and attempting to look happy, but failing miserably. She looked like her soul had been shattered. It probably didn't help that Kim had made Marcia a fake Tinder profile and made her appear to be as skanky and easy as possible. She had even turned her phone off when she got home from school today, which was so out of character for her. Marcia is never without her phone. But now Kim had even taken that away from her. I wonder how many creepy guys had called her before she found out about the Tinder account. Of course I did my best to shut these things down as they happened. I wanted to prevent her from seeing as much of Kim's harassment as possible, but in the days of social media, information passes almost instantly, and a mean post left up for even 20 minutes can still be seen by half the school. As Marcia tried to go around me in the hall, I reached out for her and gave her a hug. "I love you, sis," I said. "Okay. Why are you hugging me?" she asked. "It's just important to me that you know you are loved, that there are people who care about you, and that I'm one of them." "You're a dork," she said, smiling, but her eyes were beginning to water. I prayed she believed me, and as she closed the door to her bedroom, I made a promise to her even though I knew she could never hear it. "Somehow, I'm going to make this right for you." I had Kim in my English class, and one day after class, I decided I would try to take the high road with her and tapped her on the shoulder as we were leaving the classroom. "Hi, Kim. I'm Jeff. I'm Marcia's brother." When I said this, a look of disgust flashed across her face, but to Kim's credit, it passed quickly, and she stopped to listen to what I had to say. "I know you're posting these videos of Marcia. I'm sure you think it's all fun and games, but Marcia has really been hurt by this. I'm sure you're not a mean person, and you may not realize the damage this is causing, so I'm here to ask you if you would stop." I didn't have a lot of hope that this approach would reach Kim, but I figured it was worth the effort. Kim just stood there staring at me with a smug look on her face. "Marcia looks up to you," I said to break the awkward silence between us. "She's also a terrific person. She's caring and kind, and I'm sure if you gave her a chance, you would like her." Kim just stood there, and I decided to wait for a response. We stood in the hall as the other students walked past us in a strange Mexican standoff, waiting to see who would talk first or walk away. I don't do well with confrontation, and my experience talking to attractive women was all but nil, so confronting Kim was so far out of my comfort zone, I didn't really know what I should do next. Finally, Kim broke the silence. "Your sister's a whore, and my videos are a public service announcement," she said, and started to walk away from me. I instinctively reached out and grabbed her arm. "Look, Kim, I don't think you understand. My sister is a shell of her former self. She's not eating. I hear her through the walls crying all the time. She's got so many awful calls from that fake Tinder account you set up, she had to change her phone number. Oh, and her hair is literally falling out from the stress. If you were somehow trying to break her or something, mission accomplished. She can't take much more of this. I'm worried she might kill herself. Do you want that hanging over you?" "She should kill herself. She'd be doing us all a favor," Kim said, yanking her arm free. I just wanted to have a rational conversation with her. I was hoping to find the smallest amount of compassion inside of Kim and hoping she would say something like, "Oh my God, I had no idea. I will take those videos down and apologize." I wanted her to understand that high school is hard enough without being bullied 1,000 times a day by those people who by all means should be your friends. I was angry, and I had to understand somehow. I grabbed Kim's arm a little harder than I intended to and turned her to face me. "What happened to you? How did you end up this way? What was it that made you into such a bitch?" I asked. "What did you call me?" Kim asked with all the indignance of a pampered Disney princess. What I didn't realize at the time, because my attention was so focused on Kim, was that Kim's boyfriend Trevor, a large lineman on our football team who also happens to be the guy I bit when Shane stepped on me and broke my leg, had taken notice of our conversation and was now moving towards us. "I called you a raging, frothing at the mouth, inconsiderate, crazy-ass bitch. You know, even if Marcia were a whore, which she's not, that would still be better than what you are. At least whores are nice to people. You are sad and pathetic, and you think that somehow making Marcia feel small in some way makes you bigger. You are just a bad person." This was when boyfriend football player who was at least twice my size sucker punched me in the face. Keep in mind, at this point, I still have a cast on one foot, am on crutches, and wouldn't know how to block a punch if my life depended on it. I don't remember much after that, but some people told me later that he took a few more shots while I was unconscious on the floor. I came to in the nurse's office with 2 black eyes and a bloody lip. Before they let me go home, the principal asked me to step into his office. While I held a bloody towel filled with ice over my split lip, he said he wanted to talk to me about bullying. I was overjoyed. Finally, someone in authority was going to do something about it. "Jeff, I want you to understand that this school has a zero-tolerance policy towards bullying of any kind." "I'm glad to hear that, Prince Vermogen," I said. "So would you care to explain your actions?" he asked. "I'm not sure I understand. Several people said they saw you bullying Kim in the hallway. I'm not saying that what Trevor did was right, but we can't have that type of behavior within our hallways. I'm afraid if it happens again, you will be suspended from school." I couldn't believe this was happening. I tried to protest, but he had clearly made up his mind about how the situation had unfolded, and gave me some misogynistic spiel about how girls just don't engage in that type of behavior. So I just sat there and listened to him ask me if I thought speaking to one of the school counselors about why I felt the need to psychologically and physically abuse Kim was necessary. I wanted to tell him where he could put his zero-tolerance policy, but I didn't. I had never felt so lost in my entire life. When I got home, my mom saw my face and completely freaked out. When she asked what had happened, I lied and told her I fell, but she wasn't buying it. "You fell down? Didn't you tell me that John had fallen when he broke his arm? Wasn't that how you broke your leg? You fell down and someone stepped on it? And look at your face, Jeff. Your face looks like a bag of hammers, and there are no scrapes on your hands or knees that would indicate that there was a fall. Are you and John in some type of fight club or something?" This was about the funniest thing I'd ever heard. The only physical altercations I got into were when I got out of the shower and fought with my underwear. The underwear has 3 holes and you only have 2 legs, and sometimes it's too much to figure out. More than half of these battles I lost, and I'm sure John's fighting skills were about on the same level. So the thought of us mixing it up on some fight club was a full-on laugh riot to me. Besides, we were in Salt Lake City, Utah. I would like to remind you once again that the place where I go to high school is the same place where they filmed High School Musical. A few towns over is where they filmed Footloose. Utah isn't exactly filled with the bad boys. "Well, if I were in Fight Club, I wouldn't be able to tell you about it. First rule and all that," I said. "Damn it, Jeff, this isn't funny. Every day you're coming home hurt, and not just hurt, but broken. And that's not all. I see the way you've been lately, how you mope around the house and all these late-night trips to the school. What's going on with you? Not to mention, God knows what happened to your coat and books. I can smell them even when you leave them in your backpack. That's the worst smell my nose has ever been around. I'm worried about you. With all this stuff going on with Marcia, I can't deal with you getting in trouble as well," she said. "Wait, you know about Marcia?" "No, but I know she's going through something as well. Why, do you know something?" I hopped over to the kitchen table and sat down. My mom followed me there and sat down at the table with me. On our kitchen table, my mom kept a large bowl filled with various candy bars. She said they were for guests, like how in the old days housewives always had some fresh-baked cake or cookies that were miraculously just coming out of the oven whenever company arrived. I took a Snickers bar from the bowl and began to eat it, trying not to notice how badly my split lip hurt. "Jeff, do you know what's happening with Marcia?" my mother asked again. I don't know if it was all that happened today, confronting Kim, having my face caved in, and then having Principal Morgan accuse me of being a bully, but I couldn't tell her. I wanted to tell her about my locker, about the thing on the other side that seemed to be waiting for me more and more every day. I wanted to tell her about the animals. There had been 3 more guinea pigs and something that looked like a turtle. The guinea pigs all made it a few steps out of the locker before dying, but the turtle thing was dead on the floor of my locker when I opened it. They all had the odd blue numbers painted on them as well. The animal that disturbed me most was a dead caterpillar that was resting on the top shelf of 42E next to a paperback version of Hamlet I was reading for my English literature class. There was no number painted on the caterpillar, but there was a wet piece of paper next to it that read, "Not all caterpillars get to become butterflies," written in that horrible blue paint I had come to dread. I wanted to tell her about how my textbooks would sometimes go missing from my locker, only to show up a few days later with strange writings in them. But more than anything, I wanted to tell her what was going on with Marcia, to show her the YouTube videos and the emails, to show her the fake Tinder and Snapchat accounts, to show her the badly photoshopped pictures of obese women or porn stars, all with Marcia's face on them, but I couldn't. My mom would never believe me about the locker, and telling her about Marcia would be breaking an untold covenant between my sister and myself that I couldn't fully understand. "Everything's going to be okay, Mom. I just fell down," was all I could say. My mom began to cry and then went into her bedroom. The one person I did feel like I could talk to was John. One night he came over to play Xbox and eat a massive amount of my mom's spaghetti, and I asked him for help. John liked Marcia and had a healthy crush on her, as did any boy who spent time with her, so he was more than willing to help. We decided to live up to our hack attack name and use our powers for good. We spent most of the night trying to hack into YouTube, but ultimately failed. But we did find a way to report Kim's account, and we received a message that her account was under review, and if there was any suspicious activity, it would be shut down within 24 hours. We also tossed around the idea of creating a Tinder account under Kim's name just so she could see what it felt like, but ultimately we decided it would be a bad idea. We wanted to fix this, but we didn't want to sink to her level either. Besides, we were worried that doing anything like that would lead to more hostile attacks on Marcia, and neither of us thought she could take much more. We never once mentioned my locker, and it felt good to put our efforts into something else. The next morning when I got to school, I found Kim and a few other cheerleaders screaming at Marcia outside the field house. This was the first time I had seen the bullying cross over into real life, and it was even uglier than it was online. Kim's YouTube account had been shut down during the night. "Why can't you mind your own business, you skank?" she screamed at Marcia, and Marcia clutched her books to her chest as she tried to make her way to the class. This had become Marcia's new posture as of late. The once vibrant girl who had almost edged Kim out as the cheerleading captain now had trouble looking people in the eye and tried to make herself as small and unnoticeable as she could as she moved through the high school. "Yeah, you had no right to do that," another cheerleader said and gave Marcia a shove. "Why don't you quit the cheerleading squad and move to another school?" said another. "Or better yet, why don't you just kill yourself?" "Yeah, kill yourself." Soon they were all screaming it, "Kill yourself," like it was a new cheer that they were practicing for the basketball team or something. The surreal thing about it was that there were dozens of my classmates around watching this happen, and not one of them did anything. Not one. Maybe like me, they were just stunned by this, and so they simply didn't know how to respond, but deep down I knew that wasn't it. They just didn't care. I yelled at them and called Kim the one word you're never supposed to call a woman, and thankfully this was enough for them to turn their rage on me and leave Marcia alone. Kim's boyfriend Trevor shoved me, and I asked him if he wanted to sucker punch me again like the coward he was, and once again I found myself in this school's nurse's office holding a bag of ice over my eye. Principal Morgan came into the nurse's office carrying a clipboard and shaking his head. "It seems that our conversation about bullying didn't sink in. I'm disappointed in you, Jeff," he said. "You're disappointed in me? For God's sakes, look at me. Do I look like the bully or the person being bullied? How traumatized does Trevor look?" "People saw you taunting and calling Kim's names. They said Trevor was just defending her, again," Principal Morgan said. So Trevor gets to defend Kim, but I can't defend my sister? I would also like to point out that Kim isn't the one who's in here in the nurse's office. Neither is Marcia, he said, and right there I knew I would never be able to convince him. We take violence against women very seriously at the school, Jeff. I'm afraid I have no choice but to suspend you. He held out the clipboard with the suspension form attached to it, and I signed it. When I got home, my mom was waiting for me in the kitchen. The school had obviously called her about my suspension, and she was furious. However, she also knew I had never had problems with school, either academically or disciplinary actions, so she wanted to give me the benefit of the doubt. She again asked what was going on with me, and I could see the pain that this was causing her. There was all this hurt between Kim and Marcia that was affecting those around them, and nobody was willing to talk about it. I didn't want to break Marcia's trust, but it was obvious that my going about this alone wasn't working. Marcia would still be at school for the rest of the day, so I wasn't worried about her walking in on us. I broke. Mom, there's something going on at school. I've been trying to deal with it on my own to protect you, but it's getting worse, and I don't know what to do anymore. Tell me, she said. Actually, I have to show you. Would you maybe put on a pot of coffee? This could take a while. While she made the coffee, I got my laptop and booted it up. When my mom came back to the table, I gently took her hand. Mom, there's no way to tell you about this without it hurting you, and I'm sorry for that. I thought I could deal with this on my own and protect you from it, but I was wrong. There's nothing going on with me. I'm fine. But Marcia isn't, and she needs some help. I pulled up a YouTube video that was 3 months old and had over 20,000 views. It was one of the tamer ones where Kim had said that Marcia had slept with most of the football team after their first win of the season. I watched the video at least a dozen times, and it never got any easier. My mom's eye widened and then filled with tears as the video progressed. This is on YouTube? She asked in disbelief. Yes. Are there more of these? There are dozens, I said. Oh my God, why didn't you say something? Marcia never told me about it. I found out by hacking into her Facebook account. Jeffrey, Mom said disapprovingly. She only calls me Jeffrey when she's disappointed. Why did you do that? Because I had a feeling this happened. One night I found Marcia crying while looking at Facebook. And that's when you found this video? Not exactly. I found that out by hacking into her email account. The worst of it is on her cell phone, though. John and I bought a burner phone and cloned it to Marcia's. We can't do anything through her phone, but we can see her text messages and listen to her voicemails. You and John did all that? Yes, and Mom, I know it's not okay, but there are hundreds, if not thousands, of hateful text messages on her phone. For the most part, Marcia never responds, and when she does, it's only to ask them to stop. But these things are so mean. I don't know how she's dealing with this constant barrage. Alright, I get why you did it, but it's not okay, Jeff. People deserve their privacy, but we can deal with that later. So the other day when you came home all beat up, that was about this? Yes, I confronted the girl who was doing this, Kim Dell, and I asked her to stop. Wait, Kim Dell? The cheerleading captain? I thought she and Marcia were friends. I thought so as well. There are other members of the squad who are doing this as well, but Kim is the instigator of all of it. Kim's boyfriend showed up and punched me out, and then Kim went to the principal and told her that I was bullying her, and the principal took her side. And this expulsion today? She asked. I told her about what I saw today and how I tried to stand up for Marcia, and how once again Trevor had used me as an anger management doll, and how everyone said that I was bullying Kim, which led to the principal expelling me. Oh, Jeff, she said, and then looked back to the computer screen. Was this how John broke his arm too? I had been so worried about whether or not I had just made the whole situation worse by telling my mom about it that this question completely blindsided me. John was over at my house at least 3 times a week. Surely she would ask him about it now. Telling her what had happened to John would mean telling her about my locker, and I wasn't ready to do that yet. Maybe if I had, things would have been easier in the end, but I didn't. I just told her yes, that John's arm had been broken as a result of this as well, but I asked her not to say anything about it because he kind of had a thing for Marcia and felt embarrassed about the whole. Okay, I will keep my mouth shut about it, but tomorrow morning you and I are going down to the principal's office and we're sorting this out. There's no way I'm allowing you to be suspended for sticking up for your sister. Now, you say there are more of these videos? Lots more, I said. Show me everything. Whatever shred of decency I was hoping to find in Kim vanished when she decided to take her bullying of Marcia to the next level. My calling her names and confronting her this morning only made the situation so much worse. Kim had now convinced Trevor to get in on the bullying situation, which opened a floodgate of new people who were now witnessing and participating in the attacks on Marcia. Trevor posted a video saying that Marcia had given him more than one STD and was warning the other football players to stay away from her. He didn't just warn the football team at East High, but also the teams of the other schools that East High sometimes played. He claimed to know about how oftentimes Marcia would go into the visiting team's locker rooms after the game to show her own version of school spirit, and didn't want any of the other players to catch something that might hurt their season. Sadly, there was not a lot of support towards Marcia when this came out. There were a few people who tried to stand up for her online, but these comments were either quickly lost in a sea of insults or trolled. Other people were jumping in on the bandwagon though, and in less than a single day, Marcia's phone had received over 400 messages from strangers, hurling every insult you could possibly imagine. That night, as I laid in bed, dreading what was going to happen the next day, I had the dumbest, most insane thought I had ever had, yet in the midst of all this chaos, it was a piece of order that made perfect sense. After my locker had attacked John, I had all but stopped using it. Honestly, I was terrified of 42E. The dread I felt every time I pulled up on the latch to open it was soul-crushing. I imagined it must be something like how an alcoholic must feel when they take that first drink of the day. You know it's something you shouldn't do and that it will cause you and those around you pain and do nothing but complicate your life, yet you're compelled to do it anyway. I needed to know what was inside my locker, but I was also afraid of the truth. I found myself thinking about logical explanations and absurd justifications as to how the evil, which is what it was, evil, inside my locker was perfectly normal. I was drawn to it. It was my spot. It was the only place in the world where I felt like I mattered, and I had been running away from it. It provided me with the opportunity to step up and grow into the man I wanted to be more than I was, more than just another invisible face walking around the halls. What was happening to Marcia, what had happened to John, my own broken leg and the beatings I had endured, was 42E punishing me for abandoning it. I once saw this documentary for a psychology class about something called learned helplessness. They put these dogs in these cages where the floors could conduct electric shocks and would cause the dogs pain. In some groups, they would administer the shocks when the dog did something bad, and in others, they would shock them when they did something good. Both of these groups learned how to adapt and basically function in life, even with the shocks. However, there was this third group where they just administered the shocks at random. After a few months of this, these dogs reverted to a state called learned helplessness. These poor dogs realized that there was nothing they could do to control their environment or the punishing shocks, so most of the time they just laid in their cages, refusing to play and sometimes even to eat. When the shocks were given to these animals, they didn't cry out like the other two groups. They just sat there and took it. Looking into these dogs' eyes, there was just nothing there. Even if you happened to get a tail wag out of them or something, their eyes were hollow and void of emotion. Seeing them this way was the ugliest thing I'd ever seen in my life, until Marcia got home that night. Marcia walked through the front door looking shattered. There's just no other way to describe it. She was broken, and I doubted that all the king's horses and all the king's men could ever come close to putting her back together again. I didn't like it and hoped I would never see it again. She looked so sad. Her eyes looked like her tear ducts had run dry. She would look at you, but I doubted she was seeing anything. My mom and I were waiting in the kitchen when she walked in, and Marcia stopped when she saw us. "I guess you know," she said, and started crying. My mom hugged her, but Marcia just stood there with her arms at her side, one hand still holding onto her backpack. "We're gonna fix this," Mom said. "Fix this? There's no fixing this, Mom. I'm going to talk to the principal tomorrow. There has to be something we can do." "The principal doesn't care. Jeff tried to help, and look at what happened to him. They suspended him, Mom, just for trying to help. Everyone who gets involved in this ends up getting hurt by it. There's nothing we could do. Everyone in that school hates me, and the worst part of it is I don't even know why. I'm not a bad person. I never did anything to Kim, but they all line up behind her. People who I thought were my friends now won't even look at me, let alone talk to me. Why do they all hate me? Why?" "They don't hate you," my mom began, but Marcia pulled out her tablet from her backpack and opened up her email box. "Don't they, Mom? I've got pages after pages of email telling me different." "Maybe we can change schools or something," my mom suggested, but Marcia just scoffed. "Where am I going to go, Mom? Where? You've seen what the football team is saying about me. Every school in the valley knows about this. Moving to another school isn't going to change anything." "I don't know, Marcia, but we're going to find a way, okay?" my mom asked. "The strange thing is, I've never even slept with anyone," Marcia said. "I know that, honey," my mom said, and I nodded in agreement. "So do the people who matter," I added. She looked at me as if she was noticing me for the first time. "Oh, Jeff," she said, "I'm so sorry you got caught up in this." I hugged her and said, "You don't have anything to be sorry for. None of this is your fault. I'm sorry I didn't notice it sooner. I'm sorry I haven't been able to do anything to stop it. There's nothing you could have done. I also want you to know that John called me this afternoon and said that he would totally go down to the school and do the whole shooting spree thing to kill all of these people. But he doesn't actually own a gun, and the only one he's ever fired is the one on the Super Nintendo system playing Duck Hunt. That's sweet of him. Did Trevor break his arm? She asked. No, that was totally unrelated, I said, and then quickly offered to make Marcia a cup of coffee, thereby changing the subject. Honey, I don't know how, but we are going to fix this. I will do anything for you. If we have to move to another state, we will do it. I don't care. Whatever it takes, my mom said. I was wondering if she meant it though, because what I was thinking was well beyond whatever it takes. Sitting in the principal's office is bad enough, but sitting there with your mom has to be some undiscovered layer of Dante's hell. Principal Morgan had agreed to meet with us to discuss my suspension, as if my mom was giving him a choice in the matter. She had been up the entire night, reading through emails, watching videos, and trying to comfort Marcia, so she was already a little tired and a lot angry when we walked into his office. We can't control what students are doing on the internet, especially if they're not accessing it on school property, Principal Morgan said, after my mom had showed him the plethora of vile coming from Kim's new YouTube account. So she gets to do this, but whenever somebody tries to stand up for her, they get suspended? All right. Obviously, there's more to this situation than I was made aware of, and we can definitely lift the suspension on Jeff, but we also can't have students fighting in the hallways. Jeff hasn't been the one fighting. Trevor has been the one fighting. In fact, both of my children have been tormented at your school for months now, and nobody has done anything about it. Marcia is not in school today because I made her stay home so she wouldn't be subjected to this abuse, my mom said. We take bullying very seriously at... Really? My mom asked sarcastically. If you take it so seriously, tell me one thing you've done to stop this. Just one thing. It doesn't even have to be with Marcia. Just tell me one simple thing you've done to stop the bullying of a student, any student, besides suspending my son. Principal Morgan stood up and looked out his office window. Can we speak candidly? He finally asked. Please, my mom said. The biggest lie that a kid will learn during their school years is that bullying will not be tolerated. It's a catchphrase we adults use to make us feel better about the situation. We're not stupid. We know it's happening, and I share your frustration. But like I said, with this type of bullying that Marcia is experiencing, there's very little we can do about it. The sad reality is that technology moves faster than policy. The Board of Education knows this type of bullying is taking place all over the country, but at the rate technology grows, it's almost impossible to stay on top of it. There are First Amendment rights that need to be addressed, and while laws are currently being written to try to protect students from this abuse, they are still very much in the development and trial phase. Most of the time, teachers and administrations don't even know it's happening because it's all taking place online or through cell phone services. We don't get to see it that often unless a child or a parent brings it to our attention, like you're doing today, which is frankly something I wish more parents and students would do. There are some things that we can do. I can remove Kim from the cheerleading squad. However, since Marcia is co-captain, that would mean she would be the new captain and take Kim's place. There could be some negative fallout from that, which I would like to spare Marcia from if at all possible. Also, based on these videos, I'm not even sure Marcia would want to remain on the cheerleading squad. I wouldn't. Another more extreme option is that we kick them all off the squad. They've all either participated or allowed this to happen, which is about the furthest thing from school spirit that I can imagine. So let's get rid of every member except for Marcia, who would then be responsible for recruiting a whole new cheerleading squad. This would send a strong message, but it would also put a lot of pressure on Marcia. I wish there was more we could do about online taunting, but please believe me, I know Marcia's a good kid, and I don't want to see her go through this. I would advise maybe taking a day to think it over and perhaps even talk to Marcia about it and see what she wants us to do. I will have to do something to Kim about this, but I will let you make the decision as to what that should be. I had turned off my phone before going to see Principal Morgan, and when I booted it up in the car, it went crazy with text messages and missed call alerts. The first text was from John. It was only 3 words and a link to a YouTube video. The message read, "Where are you?" in all caps. I clicked the link and saw a thumbnail with Marcia's face on it. Mom, we have to get home, now, I said, and immediately called 911 to dispatch an ambulance to our house. My mom was frantically trying to get me to tell her what was going on, but finally let me talk to the dispatcher and focused on getting us home as soon as possible. We pulled into the driveway, and my mom bolted into the house as I fumbled to get my crutches out of the car. Fortunately, the ambulance arrived right as I was finally getting out of the car. The paramedic looked to me to see if I might be the patient, but I waved him to get inside the house, which thankfully they did. Marcia was still conscious, but there were at least 4 empty prescription bottles on the bathroom floor next to her. My mother stood outside the bathroom sobbing as the paramedics attended to Marcia. When I walked into my English class, all the conversation in the room stopped and everyone looked at me. Everyone had obviously seen Marcia's suicide note video and knew she had tried to kill herself yesterday. They also knew Kim had played a major part in it, and then the two of us were in the same room. In a world where school shootings are a fairly common thing, I'm sure there were a few students in that room who thought I might try to do something and wondered if they might be in danger, from the nerdy kid who had finally been pushed to the breaking point. Even Trevor seemed worried, as if the first bullet fired might be for him. Of course I didn't have a gun, and I wouldn't know how to use it if I did, but that didn't mean I was completely unarmed. As I stood there, just inside the doorway, my eyes met those of a girl from the cheerleading squad named Heather. Heather had of course been in on the psychological torture of Marcia as well, but as we stood there looking at one another, I realized that Heather was a victim too. It was written all over her face that she knew that if she didn't go along with the harassment of Marcia, that she would be bullied as well. Her torment on Marcia was some type of defense mechanism, and I could see she never thought it would go this far. I felt a wave of compassion for her and wondered how many of the others had just followed along, thinking it was simple fun and games, not realizing the effect or the extent of the damage they were causing. The silence in the room was heavy, and even Mr. Melville just stood there by his desk, unsure of what to do next. "How's your sister?" Kim finally asked with complete smugness and a total lack of caring. That was all the invitation I needed. "You're the worst human being I've ever known," I said. I took out my backpack and reached inside, and I felt a surprising amount of pleasure as several students tried to take cover by dropping to the floor as I did this. But there was nothing to worry about. The only thing I was reaching for was one of the 3 Nalgene bottles I had in my backpack. I walked over to her desk, unscrewing the cap, and poured the first bottle of the thick blackish liquid over Kim's head. "Do you know what this is? This is activated charcoal. This is what they had to pump into Marcia's stomach to get her to throw up the pills. She had to drink this, a lot of it." Trevor stood up and I pulled out a Bic lighter I had bought at 7-Eleven 20 minutes before and flicked the steel wheel on it. "It's also highly flammable, so sit your ass down, Trevor." I doubted very much that this was true, but I was pretty sure Trevor was dumb enough to not know either. I took out the other 2 bottles and sat them on Kim's desk. This is how much she had to drink, just under a gallon. The last quart they had to administer through a tube, shoved down her neck and into her stomach because she kept passing out because the pills she took were killing her. "I thought about making you drink this, Kim, every last drop of it, but then I realized you're so small and pathetic you would probably see yourself as the victim in all this and the message would be completely lost on you. But I pray to God in those private moments, in those times when you lay awake at night, I pray that you understand that you almost killed an innocent person for no other reason than at the center of your being, the person who you truly are is nothing more than a bitch." The look on Kim's face was total indignance. She didn't care about her actions. She only cared that I had just humiliated her in front of the entire classroom. The fury in seeing that look made me smile as I left the room. I hobbled into the hallway, waiting for Kim to follow me. I heard a few students in my English class clap and cheer as I walked out of the room, which made me feel not quite so alone. Kim stormed into the hall after me, just like I was hoping she would, with Trevor right on her heels. "Don't you walk away from me," she yelled, and as I turned to look at her, I was surprised to see that several of the other students in the class were following us into the hallway, hoping to see how this would play out. Now I just had to get her to the basement hallway. I walked past the part of the hallway where the jocks hang out and headed down towards the basement when Kim caught up to me and grabbed me by the hair. She was screaming at me, but was so angry it was impossible to tell what she was saying. Trevor wasn't exactly sure what he should do, but knew that he couldn't look bad in front of his jock buddies, so he grabbed me and pushed me the rest of the way down the stairs. John and the rest of the hack attack heard the commotion and came out of the computer lab to see what was going on. I got up and swung a crutch at Trevor, which connected solidly but did little damage due to the padding on the top of the crutch and his heavy Letterman jacket, but it was enough to piss him off. Kim leapt on top of me and started scratching my face. I managed to throw her off of me, but not without most of the football team watching. Even though they didn't know exactly what was going on, they knew in the social status of East High School that she was a lot closer to being one of them than I was. They started pushing me around and edging Trevor on to fight me, but Kim seemed more interested in doing that herself. I think she felt she would have no problem beating up a guy on crutches with a broken foot, and she was right. I wasn't giving her much of a fight as she punched me with hands covered in dripping charcoal. John tried to pull her off of me, but he was quickly grabbed by the rest of the football players and tossed aside. That was when I saw it. 42B was there against the wall, shaking as if something inside of it was banging on the door from the inside, trying to get out. My eyes met John's, and he gave me the tiniest of nod, and I knew he had seen the locker moving too. I threw Kim off of me and made it to my feet. This time when she charged, I spun her around and slammed her back into the wall, close to 42E, and held her there. The door to my locker opened, and there was this strange orange light coming out of it. Kim struggled against me, but I kept pinning her against the wall. I grabbed her wrist and shoved her hand into 42E. Whatever was inside the locker started to pull her, and I could see that awful darkness, like activated charcoal, starting to move up her arm as it consumed her. John grabbed Kim's other arm and was locked in the strangest game of tug-of-war ever. Shane ran over and grabbed a hold of Kim's waist, trying to pull her out of the locker. Trevor stood there not knowing if he should punch me again or help Kim. "Help us, Trevor," Shane shouted, and Trevor grabbed a hold of Kim and braced his foot against the wall. Kim yelled, and I later told myself it was because they were pulling too hard on her, but I knew that was a lie. "What is touching me?" she finally screamed. "What is touching me? What is touching me? It's touching me. Touching. It's touching. It's touching. What is touching me? It's touching me. Touching. What is touching?" They pulled as hard as they could, but with a crunching sound that would keep me awake long into my adult life, Kim was pulled further and further into the locker. There was no way her body would fit between the width of the door, but it was. Her head was inside the locker now, and she was screaming. The blackness reached Shane's hand, and he pulled away from it as if it was electrified. When he did, Kim was jerked hard against the locker. The darkness spread over her face, and her screams could be felt in my chest like when you stand too close to a speaker at a loud concert. Her body folded as her back snapped, and what was once a beautiful teenage girl was now mangled into something that no longer even looked human. Trevor was crying. Shane and John were screaming for help. Principal Morgan arrived just to watch one of his students being pulled into his locker like a cat being shoved into a gym sock. The tiniest smile spread over my face. Through the muffled screams, I heard one thing from Kim with crystal clarity. "I'm so sorry." I stood there watching when a boom loud enough to break several windows on the first and second floors happened, and just like that, Kim was gone. The door to 42E creaked once and then slowly closed. My family moved to Oregon after that, where Marcia and I try to act like normal high school students. John still keeps me posted on any weird things happening in Utah, though. The missing person case on Kim is still open. Carlos Castaneda said that the meaning of life is finding your spot, but sometimes, just sometimes, your spot finds you. This is Darren Lamb. Thank you so much for taking the time to listen to this fun little story I wrote. I hope you enjoyed it. If you did, maybe check out my website, theworstbuddhist.com. I have lots of different books there, like Rebirth, A Zombie's Tale, or Transubstantiation, or if fiction isn't your thing, maybe try some of my nonfiction, like The Happiness Program or Ronin Buddhism. I'm sure I have something for any genre that you might be interested in. Again, thanks for taking the time to listen, and have a great day.